If you're thinking of creating a home gym, or you have a gym set up and you're looking for that extra piece of equipment to take it to the next level, my answer for you is a squat rack. In terms of bang for your fitness buck, I find it's a great investment for your resistance training. But there are so many different types of squat racks out there, and the one you choose is going to be based on you and your own situation. I'm Peter from Health and Fitness Tech, and the squat rack I have here today is an independent, freestanding type of squat rack. I have personally purchased this from Kogan, and price-wise, it's pretty cheap. But let's find out if that means it's cheap in quality. So lame. It actually doesn't have a brand, but I've been using this for a year. So this will be a long-term review. But this is a review that will also show you how freestanding independent squat racks work. If you're interested in different types of fitness equipment and tech, please consider subscribing so you don't miss out on future videos. So the video chapter summary includes, but also feel free to skip to any chapters that you may want to look at. In this review, we're going to go through looking at other equipment that you need, where did I get it from, and the costs, features, how has it aged, which is looking at condition, the pros and cons of the independent freestanding squat rack, and we'll get to my final verdict. Now, a squat rack on its own is basically useless. It's really just a stand. You're going to need a few pieces of equipment to get the most out of the squat rack. So the first is a barbell. I've got the Celsius 6-foot barbell, which is 183 centimeters. It's got a max weight capacity of 130 kilos. If you would like to know more about this barbell, leave a comment under the description. Next, you need something to lift, which is where the weight plates come in. I've got mine mostly from Kmart because they're pretty much the cheapest I can find looking at the shops, and a pair of Celsius 20 kilo plates, which I call them my fancy plates. Once again, lame. The last type of equipment I'll mention is a bench. Everyone seems to love chest day, so you'll mostly use that for bench press or sitting down while doing shoulder, strict, military presses, however you would like to class it and call it. This sums up the pieces of equipment I'll be mentioning, but also please leave a comment if there are any other equipment that you use with your squat rack. So the features and specifications of this squat rack include, so as you can see here, it's made from steel. It's got a product weight of 15 kilos. The max height is 165 centimeters with a low of 116. The most important part we're going to look at here is the max weight, which is 200 kilos. This I can't test because I don't have 200 kilos worth of plates, but really I can't even squat 200 kilos to show you. So the most I've had on it was 120 kilos, but I've never had a problem with it. But the max weight of my barbell is 130 kilos, which I was a little bit nervous putting that on. Now to get to the features. It's got J-shaped hooks. These will be where you're putting the barbell on. It's also height adjustable, so by moving the steel pipe, you can insert the pin in the holes at the right height for you. There are spotter arms, which has rubber material on them, and you can also adjust the height with the knob. Tightening and loosening the knob allows you to change and lock the spotter arms into the required position. Mind you, these spotter arms are extremely small and they're not going to save you instead of like a cage style or a half squat rack. Last feature I'll mention is the H-shaped base that provides extra support to prevent tipping. A little tip that I like to use is putting weights on each side of the base just to keep the squat rack in place, and it just adds further support to prevent that tipping and gives me a little bit of peace of mind. Although the squat rack works fine by itself, these features have all worked well and has provided me all that I've needed to lift those weights. So after more than a year, how has this Kogan squat rack aged? I'm happy to say it's still in good working condition. It all works, nothing is broken, and there isn't too many signs of wear and tear. I'd also like to note for 4 months or more, it was kept outside under a veranda, and when it really rained, it got wet. So it's battled the elements there. Now it's not all perfect. There is one issue. Now it hasn't affected me using this squat rack, but I'm also going to note it now, and we'll look at it more when we go through our inspection. There's a bit of a wobble on one of the squat racks, where there's something uneven at the base, but it doesn't mean it's just going to tip. Okay, let's start from the top and go down. The J-shaped hooks where we place the barbell, they are scratched and you can see the steel underneath because it's metal on metal here. And it's just black paint. Does it impact the use? No, it doesn't. Considering it's been used a lot, the J-shaped hooks have held up pretty well. Now the main stand itself is in pretty good nick. The paint is holding up and there's a few scratches and bumps, but really there's not much at all. I can't see rust in the holes, and on the stand itself, which is pretty good considering it's been stored outside for nearly half a year. The pins are holding up well, they're not broken. I can see small signs of rust forming, but nothing major at all. Considering once again, they've been outside pretty much, getting wet and battling the elements of moisture as well. Now we're at the screw-in knob to adjust the height of the stand and also the safety arms. I haven't had any problems with them. After a year, they're still in good working condition. You can see the rubber arms are also in decent condition. The rubber pads are stuck on by glue by the looks of it, and I can say they haven't been coming off. Mind you, I haven't actively been trying to rip it off, so it pretty much works as advertised. Lastly, we're at the base. The steel is all intact, even at all the joints. I haven't had to tighten any of the knobs, the bolts, since I put it together. Also, the rubber feet haven't fallen off, which is really good since you don't want that while you're trying to re-rack your barbell. Now I'm going to get to the wobble. You can see there is some unevenness between the feet, which has some give there. I've noticed that when I'm using the squat rack, there is a little lean, and to be honest, by looking at it, it does make me a tad nervous, but I'm also thinking, if it's too rigid, the weight goes too much on one side, so there's no give, so it's going to tip easier. The fact that there is some give actually allows for some flexibility, which ironically makes it harder to tip. I'm confusing myself here, but it is all up here. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this in the comments. But as you can see, this independent squat rack easily passed the test for long-term durability. It's been a year, but I'm sure it's gonna have a few more years of use, or even more than that. Okay, so I'm gonna list and go through some cons that this squat rack has that I bought from the Kogan website. But it also applies to freestanding independent squat racks in general. First one is that they're not as stable because they're just not fixed like a linked squat rack, power rack, or even a squat rack that's drilled into a wall. Another disadvantage is the weight limit is reduced. This Kogan squat rack has a weight limit of 200 kilos, but to be fair, it's more than enough weight for the general population. The bigger disadvantage that's linked to the weight limit is actually the lack of spotter arms. Let's say you're going for a new PR, you just don't have that safety net like you would with a squat rack cage or even a half cage. Also, there could be some difficulties keeping the squat rack in the same position when you use it, especially if you have to constantly put it away, store it, and get it out again. So the last disadvantage is that because the squat rack is separated with individual stands, if one breaks or is just not usable, then there's not much use for the other stand. So now we're going to hear and list some pros. Firstly, this type of squat rack is far cheaper than if you were to buy other types of squat racks. I bought this for under 100 Australian dollars and it's still going strong after a year. This is the perfect squat rack for a budget home gym setup because the barbells and weight really add up in price. Next, the squat rack saves space when using it, but also when you need to store it. It's probably the best type of squat rack if you don't have a lot of space in your home gym, or if you're working out in an apartment, even those apartment verandas, or just a normal bedroom. This was my biggest reason for choosing the freestanding independent type of squat rack. Another pro is that it's really accessible to move, which goes back to being able to use it in tight spaces and storing it easily. One big advantage for me is that I don't need to drill this squat rack into any wall. I'm not in a situation where I can just screw into a wall, make a squat rack fixed, and I know this can be a deal breaker for, let's say, anyone who would be renting or just doesn't want to have two holes in their wall if they need to move their squat rack for whatever reason. My last pro that I'm going to mention, which is said in the cons section, where I said the squat rack not being in a fixed position can be a con because it may not always be in the same position. But on the flip side, not being fixed allows you to customize the position of the squat rack based on your individual characteristics. You may have multiple people using it, some who's tall and maybe some who's shorter. The position of a squat rack can be wider or narrower to suit different people, so it actually turns into a pro as well. Okay, now to sum it up. Do I recommend this independent freestanding squat rack that I purchased from Kogan that does not have a brand due to being a third-party seller? Yes, I most definitely do. These were inexpensive, they've lasted the test of time and weather. I'm still using them to this day. So if you have a budget home gym, an apartment, or basically have limited space to work out for your resistance training, these are the perfect squat racks for you. I'm Peter from Health and Fitness Tech, and I'll catch you in the next video.